You're staring at a screen, scrolling through 800 movies. You spend 20 minutes weighing the options, feel completely exhausted, and ultimately click on a movie you've already seen. We usually write this off as laziness or a lack of focus, but when you are paralyzed by a massive catalog on platforms like Netflix, you are actually experiencing a strict hardware limitation. Your brain is literally running out of physical fuel. We operate under the assumption that maximizing options maximizes our freedom and happiness. Yet behavioral economics shows that the more choices we have in front of us, the less satisfied we become with our eventual pick, and the more likely we are to walk away without choosing anything at all. Take a look at this split-screen graph from a famous study conducted in the year 2000. When researchers set up a grocery store display offering 24 different flavors of jam, the conversion rate was dismal. Only 3% of the customers who stopped by actually bought a jar. But watch what happens on the right side of the chart when they ran the second half of the experiment. When the display was reduced to only 6 flavors, the purchase rate spiked to 30%. Reducing the options drove a 10-fold increase in sales. Giving those consumers 24 flavors didn't empower them. It introduced a cognitive load so heavy that it overwhelmed their processing capacity and physically prevented them from making a choice. Think of your brain like a smartphone running a high-end application. The more intensive the task, the faster the battery drains. The application running your decision-making process is the prefrontal cortex, the CEO of your brain. And its physical battery acid is a simple sugar, glucose. Every single option you evaluate burns a measurable drop of that glucose. This anatomical model shows exactly what happens on a biological level. Research points to a specific tipping point. Once you evaluate 7 meaningful options, glucose levels in your prefrontal cortex drop so low, your brain's hardware must adapt. To preserve energy, it automatically shuts down deliberative mode, forcing a switch to a fast, low-energy, intuitive mode. Control is handed over to the striatum, your habit engine. The striatum doesn't weigh pros and cons. It simply looks for the safest, most familiar default option to avoid any further cognitive friction. Decision fatigue is an involuntary metabolic shift. You cannot push through it with sheer willpower because you have literally switched from the thinking brain to the habit brain. This biological quirk scales up rapidly into high-stakes environments. A 2010 study tracked car buyers who had to navigate a long sequence of customizations, from the exterior color down to the engine type and interior trim. By the time they reached their 6th sequential choice, the buyers experienced such severe cognitive load that they stopped evaluating entirely. They simply accepted whatever the pre-selected default option was. The implications get much darker in the legal system. A 2011 study analyzed the decisions of Israeli parole judges. At the start of a session, when their glucose reserves were fully stocked, the judges granted parole 65% of the time. This graph tracks what happened next. As the judges made consecutive rulings throughout the morning, their approval rates plummeted in a jagged slope, eventually flatlining near 0% by the end of the session. Those judges were not deciding to be cruel. Their prefrontal cortices were completely out of fuel. Their habit brains took over and selected the path of least resistance, denying the parole and keeping the prisoner exactly where they were. If the human brain defaults to the easiest option the moment it gets tired, then whoever designs the menu of options controls the final outcome. Massive online inventory causes instant cognitive fatigue. Retail giants know this, which is exactly why they bypass the selection process entirely with frictionless, one-click tools like a Buy Again button. You see the same exploitation on dating apps. Users face a barrage of 100 potential matches, drain their prefrontal cortex in 10 minutes, swiping based strictly on speed rather than actual compatibility. There is a psychological loophole, though. Experts in a given field don't suffer from choice overload. When you can organize a massive list of options into strict, recognizable categories, those categories act as a glucose-saving algorithm. With clear categories, you aren't actually making a new decision. You are executing a pre-programmed habit, allowing you to bypass the costly prefrontal cortex altogether. This brings us to an uncomfortable question. If an endless buffet of choices literally breaks our biological capacity to choose, is absolute freedom actually worse for us? Think back to the last major life decision you made. chances are you only considered 3 to 5 options before your brain locked in its answer. We fall into a modern trap. We waste precious glucose pretending to carefully evaluate 20 different paths just to convince ourselves we are being thorough. The physiological rule is strict. You can only evaluate about 7 meaningful choices before your brain starts cheating and relying on habits. Stop fighting your own biology. The next time you are paralyzed by a massive restaurant menu, a crowded job board, or a dating app, narrow it down to 3 options. Pick one and move on. You aren't being lazy. You are optimizing your neurobiology.